Aleta, what inspired you in Kristine and to start writing this story?
Well, Maren and I were talking yesterday a little bit about that spark that comes, and that many of us, and I think many of you who are here, have had an experience either visiting the old family farm, or if you were lucky enough to go to Norway. I see my sister's on the call. She and I and my cousin all have had the chance to go to Norway. I first went with Kristine of the story, my grandmother, when I was 15. And it was really kind of I think I was supposed to go and help her with her baggage because my grandpa couldn't go and my mom couldn't go. But I was useless in that, as I recall. However, I being there and meeting many of the people that appear in the story sparked something in me that has lived with me. I felt at home. There was this sort of seed planted in a special way. And so I have continued to develop these relationships in different ways and stayed in touch. And I'm so grateful for technology. We've been talking about that tonight, because it's allowed us to continue to do that and develop that over time. So that seed was planted. And I started out, actually, I was going to tell my mother's story. And I found that I was a little too close to it. You know, I couldn't separate from being the daughter. And so and then my mother passed away many years ago, but my mother's sister had done this amazing work with collecting letters and photos and an immigrant album, Tante Ruth. And she said, Aleta, you have to write this story. And she said it again and again and told me, and she and I had a little interview about what I should include and what I shouldn't include. And so it was all those things coming together. It's a long answer. I'm sorry I went on so long.
It's a beautiful answer. It's absolutely a beautiful answer. I think it's interesting to hear you talk about the power of place in conjunction with the power of the people, right? And kind of that mixture there, right? To be in Norway, to see the places that are of your family, right? And are of your people, is really a powerful connection that can happen there. Fabulous. So Aleta, I know you've got a few kind of slides to share as kind of a little bit of background. Are you willing to walk through those now, if that would work?
Absolutely. I just to review, this is a picture of Christina. It's the one that's on the cover of the book. And it was taken, as far as we know, probably when Frederick left for America the first time, and she was 18. And that lovely cilia that she has on was probably her confirmation cilia. And she very likely, because she'd gone to Husmor school and had made that top or inset to her dress there. And so we're very fortunate. I see someone put in the chat something about primary sources, and we do have so many primary sources. But this is Kristine. She was born in 1891. She lived till she was 91, 1984. And this was her home. This was the home that she and her 7 brothers and sisters lived in. And there's some of them arrayed there. You can see it's very small, modest, but it is not a Husman's farm. They were merchants. They lived in town. So it was a step up from many of the people in that land poor country for farming. So, and this is my grandfather. We in the family think he was quite handsome. And he was born in 1886, so he's 5 years older than my grandmother. And he died in 1968. And the next slide, he is, I think, that's the farm that he came from. And I was talking to somebody recently, and they were not aware of that only 4% of Norway is arable land. And so I'm not sure exactly when, maybe Maren, you know the name of the law that said we're not going to divide the land up anymore.
Yeah.
And it was a form of primogeniture, but it was because there's such little land. And then that mountain behind it is Storhesten. And I've not gone all the way up, but my cousin who's on here has hiked it. And so it's sort of for those of us who are lucky to go up there, that's a goal, is to hike Storhesten. And my grandfather also was one of 7 siblings, and he was the 3rd son. So he wasn't going to get any land there. So he went to Norway, he came to America. And I'm going to use America because rather than the United States, because he first came to Canada. And is that the next slide, Andrew? Yeah. And he homesteaded this barren property. So quite a change and that may resonate with many of you in your family history. He homesteaded in Saskatchewan. This is Swift Current, Saskatchewan. He was there. I'm not sure the exact dates, but probably 1912 to 1918 were the dates that he was the 6 years he was required to work the land in order to earn it. Okay. So Grandpa was here from 1910 until he went back to Norway in 1923. He came in March, married Kristine in May, and went back to Norway in late August or went back to Canada in late August or early September to make his move to Waukegan, Illinois. In those few months, Kristine discovered she was pregnant, and talks a little bit about that in the book. And then and she decides to stay in Førde to have the baby. At the same time, her mother was declining in health. And April 15th, 1924, Udny is born. And that's my mother, my sister's mother, is on the call too. That's the scene. They're married. Grandpa was gone for 13 years. They got married, were together for 6 months. Now it's another 18 months before Kristine and the baby go to the United States. And this time, Grandpa has decided to leave the homestead in Saskatchewan, and he worked as an electrician. He was one of the early electricians. He had gotten his certificate in electricity from the Oslo Technical School. At that time was Christiania. And he was electrifying the places where he went. So he got a contract with Delco Generators and Electricity to install generators. And it was an interesting time, which we can touch on later about that. But Anyhow, he was gone. He moved from Canada to Waukegan, had lived there a while, and then Kristine came to Waukegan. She traveled. This is the passport, and we have the actual passport. So we really are very fortunate to have all these primary sources. It's a little water stained or something. But she, so that's the beginnings of that immigration story. And we thought tonight we'd talk about how the immigration is the same and different. So I don't know if there's a place that you suggest we start, Maren?
Yeah, no, I think we, Aleta, I think one of the things about this book that strikes me, and after I read it the first time, is we're looking at a little bit of a different time period than what we technically think of when we think of it's not the 19th century. This is 20th century immigration we're dealing with. And so I think there's some differences, right? Both in place and in time and just context, right? The world's changed from the first wave that even came over significantly since the sloopers that came over in 1825, right? But now we're dealing with the 20th century. And so I think, Aleta, you've got some really interesting reflections about how the immigration, how that formed kind of your understanding of Kristine's story as well.
Yeah. The place, of course, is one of the ways in which it's the same. It's the upper Midwest. And Grandpa had a more traditional orientation as a single man as he moved around the upper Midwest and Canada. And but it's an urban area. And how much of this was choice and how much of it was cultural and opportunity is up for speculation. But he chose Waukegan. Kristine didn't know what she was getting into. And Førde is a very small town. It was, particularly then, it's more of a community and a regional center now because of healthcare. But at the time, it's on the West Coast, for those of you who may not be familiar. It's between the Sognefjord and the Nordfjord in a beautiful fjord called Sundfjord, but very modest. It was fishing and farming and a little commerce. And so to be suddenly in this place that was more urban and multi-ethnic. Waukegan in the 1920s was multi-ethnic. The industrialization was really rapidly happening in Waukegan, and that was why it was an opportune place for Grandpa. It was a great business decision for him to go there, but it was not a Norwegian community. And I wonder how many of you, your relatives, went and settled. One of the things that in studying Norwegian immigration and that we can find in the museum is that people would often go to the same place as other people from the region. Mm-hmm. So if you were from the Hardangerfjord, you'd go to the area where Hardanger folks had gone. If you were from Gudbrandsdal, you sought out other people. They might be family. Maybe they weren't, but you kind of found that, and there was language that was you could find somebody who could translate for you. In Kristine's case, the only person who could translate for her was Frederick at first, and he was gone all day, every day. 2 weeks after she gets there, he writes a letter to his brother, who's back in Norway at the time, and says, I think Kristine's glad to have me home today. I took the day off. I've been gone every day since she came. Can you imagine being with this baby, not knowing a soul, not knowing how to speak the language, and being alone all day, every day? So I think there were some things that were very different there. So, and then the timing between the two world wars, the people had such mixed feelings about the Germans. Norway was neutral during the First World War and, of course, occupied during the Second World War. And that really shaped it. But this was a time that they could travel. And as long as they could establish that they weren't German, they could be accepted in the multi-ethnic community. So that's probably, as you said, Maren, a very different thing. And then the other thing that, as I reflect on it, is the relative prosperity from the first day. In preparation for this, I was reading some of my grandfather's letters before he went, and he didn't have that prosperity, but he was intent on making this the best possible thing for Kristine. He really wanted Kristine and his daughter to come. And so he bought a first-class ticket on the Bergensfjord for she and the baby. And she had a very nice apartment, and she was married to someone who had a private car that was unknown to her in where she had come from. And so she did not fit the stereotype of the couple that came together and hacked their way out of the prairie and had to suffer those kinds of hardship. They weren't wealthy. Their homes were modest, but they always had lovely things. And they didn't suffer any economic hardship from the beginning. So that's different too. And then finally, I've mentioned the industrialization, but just a little bit more about that isolation and social support. We're going to ask you to talk a little bit about how Kristine developed from that maiden aunt in Norway to more of a leader in the community that she carved out. And I wonder, and that's one of the things about writing the book, is that I wonder about how much that lack of social support in the beginning, that not being able to turn to someone else, influenced her choices and in her becoming who she became as a person.
It's beautiful, Aleta. It's such fabulous framing, right? And I as the great granddaughter of folks who ended up in North Dakota farming sand, what an incredibly different context, right? They farmed great sand land up there, and we still don't know why, but it was a circumstance, right? It was the circumstance of the time.